If you come from D&D 5e, AD&D 4e or any other edition that is not D&D 3.5, then you probably had the same reaction Tordek has in the vignette at the start of the book. Incarnum is a new magic system that was introduced in Magic of Incarnum. The designers set themselves a difficult task to come up with an entirely new magic system instead of creating a variation of an existing one, both in terms of mechanics and flavor, and I have to say that they were successful. Incarnum is very distinct from all other systems in these aspects. I really like the flavor, but it might take a while to wrap your head around the mechanics. So what is Incarnum? Incarnum is a raw energy of souls, souls of the living, the dead, and the yet unborn. Users of Incarnum are called meld shapers, and they can harness Incarnum in different ways. The most common way is shaping the so-called soul melds, semi-permanent magical effects that basically look and work like magic items. Each meld shaper has a pool of essentia, a personal Incarnum reserve. He can invest essentia in these soul melds to improve their effects, or to use them actively. Also, the soul melds can be bound to one of your chakras to get additional effects. There are also feats, spells, items and abilities that you can invest essentia into to improve them. Sounds confusing? Yeah, I can see why it would sound confusing. In play it was actually pretty simple. That's how Incarnum worked mechanically in D&D, but to port it over to GURPS properly, we also need the flavor of the Incarnum classes. Magic of Incarnum had 3 such classes: Incarnate, Soulborn, and Totemist. If I recall things correctly, only the Totemist was considered to be a good class. The Incarnate was tolerable, but nothing special, and the Soulborn was thought to be one of the weakest classes ever. But what's important is the lore. Incarnates and Soulborn are very similar in that regard. They can use Incarnum due to being utterly devoted to one of the alignments. The Totemist establishes a connection with wild nature and harnesses the soul energy of magical beasts. That should be enough to start the conversion process. Speaking of that, I have actually done all this many years ago. One of my earliest works was a complete Incarnum conversion to GURPS, but a few days ago I reworked it, trying to keep the flavor more or less the same, but simplifying and streamlining the mechanics. My first attempt actually was functional, but a bit too clunky. So here's the result. First, let's define how the soul melds and essentia work. A soul meld is a semi-permanent supernatural effect crafted from raw Incarnum. Soul melds are worn much like normal items, however most of them do not act like physical objects, but like insubstantial images that cannot be interacted with. In those soul melds that have physical substance, such as those that are used as melee weapons or armor, cannot be removed from the meld shaper's body. Soul melds take different shapes. Some look like pieces of armor or clothing, some take form of weapons, some look like jewelry, and some are abstract transparent auras. Once shaped, a soul meld lasts as long as its creator wants it to. All soul melds are clearly visible, and they can be identified with a successful expert skill Incarnum roll. A meld shaper can turn any one soul meld on or off with a ready maneuver. When a soul meld is suppressed this way, it stops providing its passive benefits, and it cannot be used actively, but it lets the character conceal his powers. What about the essentia? Essentia is a character's personal store of Incarnum. A character's essentia pool is represented with energy reserve Incarnum. Essentia can be invested into soul melds in order to enhance their effects and to use their abilities actively. If the character has no essentia left or does not want to use it for some other reason, he can use HP for the same purpose, but not FP or energy reserve of any other kind. Using HP this way does not impose a shock penalty. Thus, most active users of soul melds have cost hit points 1 HP minus 10% limitation. Essentia is energy reserve instead of vitality reserve, because it cannot be depleted by normal injury, unlike Vitality Reserve that acts as HP in all other aspects. In terms of mechanics, the Soul Melts are advantage-based abilities that have an appropriate power modifier, switchable and visible. There is no predefined list of Soul Melts. Each Melt Shaper can harness Incarnum in their own way. In terms of effects, a typical Soul Melt has a passive effect and an active effect. The passive effect does not require expenditure of any resources or any rolls, but active effect should require spending Essentia or HP. Now, as I said before, there are two main ways to harness Incarnum, so there will be two different power modifiers. First, for alignment-based melt shaping, I simply decide to use the moral power modifier from GURPS powers and modify it slightly. Melt shaping will be a -20% power modifier that consists of a -15 pact limitation and a -5 for anti-powers, because some Incarnum and magic abilities can counteract Incarnum. In effect, melt shaping is a collection of 4 powers: Chaos, Evil, Good and Order. You can find them in GURPS powers. However, do not be too restrained by the selection of advantages presented on these lists. There are many other abilities that could fit the flavor of these moral concepts. For example, the Chaos power could contain abilities that make it more difficult to catch the user, enhance dodge, slippery, etc. Order could have abilities to see through deceptions, be they normal lies, illusions or invisibility. Get creative, but consult with your GM. SJ Games has GURPS powers Good and Evil on their wishlist, but I really doubt that it will ever see the light of day, alas. I came up with a couple of examples and you can see them on the screen right now. One of the examples has both a passive and an active component, and another one only has passive effects, and both are valid. Now, Totemism is a different beast. Totemism is a -25% power modifier that consists of the -20% nature power modifier from GURPS powers and -5% for the existence of anti-powers. As always, I should remind you that there is an alternative set of nature-based penalties that you can find on page 31 of Pyramid 368. In effect, Totemism is a nature power fueled by Incarnum. Totemism is considered a single power, but its abilities can be very varied. Just like when creating Melt Shaper Soul Melts, consider giving Totemic Soul Melts a passive effect that is active all the time, and an active effect that costs Essentia or HP to use. Magic of Incarnum has many Totemic Soul Melts that you can use as an inspiration. If you find at least lacking, check the various bestiaries. Almost anything you can find on a magical beast stat block can be made into a Totemic Soul Melt, with some adjustments. I also came up with a couple of examples, you can see them on the screen right now. While melt shaping and totemism are two ways of shaping soul melts, they are not the only ways to use Incarnum. Certain creatures might have innate abilities that are powered by Incarnum, and some similar abilities may be learned. In D&D, such Incarnum abilities usually play a support role in your character concept. They allow the character to improve existing abilities instead of granting something new, but that's not always the case. However, since these abilities are not soul melts, moral or nature powers, their power modifier will be different. It's just Incarnum -5% that represents the existence of anti-powers. Such abilities still should require expenditure of Essentia or HP, so do not forget to give them cost hit points 1 HP, or more if you are particularly masochistic. I also came up with some examples based on the Incarnum feats and class abilities, you can see them on the screen right now. Incarnum also worked well to supplement powers of other magic systems. In GURPS, if you happen to have energy reserve Incarnum, or you simply would like to make life more complicated for yourself, you could modify existing abilities to give them additional effects that require expenditure of HP or Essentia, and have this additional power modifier. For example, you can see on the screen right now a sorcery spell that was given a new feature. Well, and that's it. In my opinion, now the system is much more simple, flexible, streamlined, and not as dependent on energy reserve as it was before. I think that it looks better, but who knows? I have never had anyone play an Incarnum wielding character before, despite that always being an option. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.